They poured vintage champagne over her head for a laugh, their boisterous delight echoing off the marble floors as the expensive liquid dripped from her hair and stained her crisp uniform. She was just another anonymous waitress, a momentary diversion in their gilded lives, someone they could humiliate without a second thought. What they failed to comprehend was that her brother was not just some distant, wealthy relative. He was Julian Croft, the reclusive tech magnate known on Wall Street as the Ghost, an investor whose silent, strategic moves could deconstruct corporate empires overnight. And in his minimalist penthouse overlooking the city, he had just seen the video of what they had done to his sister. Clara Croft had been on her feet for 9 hours, a marathon of polite smiles and discreet efficiency. The Grand Astoria's main dining room, Le Ciel, was a universe unto itself, a hushed cathedral of wealth where conversations were murmured over plates of food that cost more than her weekly rent. She navigated the space with a practiced grace, a phantom in black and white, refilling water glasses topped with lemon twists and replacing silverware with silent precision. She was invisible, and for the most part she preferred it that way. Invisibility was a shield. Her independence was a point of quiet, fierce pride. After their parents had passed away a decade ago, her older brother Julian had wanted to wrap her in a cocoon of financial security. He'd offered to pay for everything, her apartment, her tuition for her online psychology degree, a life of leisure. She had refused. She needed to build something that was hers, even if it was built on aching feet and the occasional condescending glance. The waitress job paid the bills, funded her education, and most importantly, it was real. It grounded her in a world far from the abstract digital empire Julian inhabited. "Table 12 needs more bread, Clara. And look sharp," Mr. Davies, the maitre d', hissed as she passed the host stand. His smile for the patrons was a porcelain mask. For the staff, it was a perpetual sneer. She nodded, securing her tray and heading toward the kitchen. Table 12 was the epicenter of the evening's disruption. 4 men, their faces flushed with alcohol and entitlement, celebrating some vague victory in the world of finance. Their laughter was a percussive, unpleasant sound, the noise of men who had never been denied anything. The one at the head of the table, a man with a jawline as sharp as his tailored suit and eyes the color of a winter sky, was the loudest. His name, she'd overheard, was Sterling Prescott III. The name carried weight in this city, a legacy of old money rooted in real estate and banking. And then I told him if he can't close the deal by Friday, he can find another firm to finance his pipe dream, Sterling was saying, gesturing expansively with a fork. His friends guffawed. Clara approached with the bread basket. "More bread, gentlemen," she asked, her voice calm and even, the professional monotone she had perfected. Sterling's cold eyes landed on her, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He looked at her, not as a person, but as an object that had just entered his field of vision. "Well, look what we have here. The silent little mouse has returned." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the table. "Tell me, what's your name?" He was looking directly at her name tag, which read Clara. It was a power play, forcing her to speak, to engage on his terms. "Clara, sir." "Clara," he repeated, tasting the name. "You've been very attentive tonight, almost like you're watching us." One of his friends, a stout man with a sweaty brow, snickered. "She probably wants a big tip, Sterling. Maybe she'll do a little dance for it." Clara's jaw tightened, but her expression remained neutral. It was a skill she had honed, absorbing minor insults like a sponge, letting them dissipate without reaction. A reaction was what they wanted. It was fuel. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" Sterling ignored her question, turning his attention to the half-empty bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket beside him. It was a 1998 Dom Perignon, a bottle that cost nearly $1,000. "You know, Clara, we're celebrating. A big win. A very, very big win." He picked up the bottle. "The kind of win you probably can't even comprehend." She felt a prickle of genuine unease. This was different from the usual drunken flirtations or casual dismissiveness. There was a deliberate theatrical cruelty in his demeanor. "I'm happy for you, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "I don't excuse you," Sterling said, his voice hardening. He stood up, the chair scraping against the polished floor. The low hum of the restaurant faltered as a few nearby tables glanced over. Mr. Davies watched from a distance, a hawk ready to swoop, but not on the predator, on the prey. "Sterling, sit down," one of his friends mumbled, a flicker of awareness crossing his face. But the others were grinning, their phones subtly angled to capture the unfolding drama. "I'm just thinking," Sterling continued, his voice rising, "that all this talk of victory and success must be so tiresome for you. Serving people like us, day in and day out. Doesn't it just grind you down? Knowing you'll be on your feet all night just to go home to some tiny apartment in a part of town I've only seen from a helicopter?" Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had learned from Julian to observe, to analyze. She saw the mechanics of the humiliation laid bare. The audience, the performance, the assertion of dominance. She saw his friends, the eager sycophants. She saw the other diners, their discomfort mixed with a voyeuristic curiosity. No one would intervene. "Have a good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice a little too tight, and turned to walk away. That was her mistake, turning her back on him. "Hey, I am not finished with you." What happened next was a blur of motion and a symphony of terrible sounds. The pop of the cork, the collective gasp of the nearby diners, the jeering laughter of his friends. Sterling grabbed the champagne bottle, not a glass, but the entire heavy bottle, and in one fluid, practiced motion, upended it over her head. The shock was absolute. The champagne was brutally cold, a frigid waterfall that plastered her dark hair to her scalp and streamed down her face, into her eyes, down her neck. Bubbles fizzed in her ears. The smell, a cloying mix of yeast and fruit, was suffocating. The sheer weight of the liquid soaked through her white blouse, rendering it transparent, clinging to her skin. The entire dining room had fallen silent, the only sound the dripping of champagne onto the floor and the raucous, unrestrained laughter from table 12. "Oh my God, did you get it?" one of them yelled, slapping the table. "That was classic." Clara stood frozen, paralyzed by a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. The cold was secondary to the searing heat of 100 pairs of eyes on her, all witnessing her utter degradation. She could feel the sticky liquid running down her back, pooling in the waistband of her slacks. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to will herself anywhere else. "What in God's name is going on here?" Mr. Davies materialized at her side, his face a mask of controlled fury. But his anger, she knew with a sinking certainty, was not directed at Sterling. Sterling Prescott III sat back down, placing the empty bottle on the table with a satisfied thud. He looked at the Metro D with an air of casual authority. "Your waitress was being insolent. I was simply expressing my dissatisfaction with the service." Mr. Davies's eyes darted from Sterling's smug face to Clara's dripping, shivering form. He saw the ruined uniform, the puddle on the floor. But he also saw the Prescott name, the Amex black card, the decades of patronage. The calculation was instantaneous. He grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "I am so sorry, Mr. Prescott. This is unacceptable. We will take care of this immediately." He turned his venomous whisper to Clara. "Get to the staff room. Now!" "But I didn't do anything," she managed to stammer, her voice trembling. "Now!" he snarled, giving her a rough shove toward the kitchens. She stumbled away, past the tables of silent, staring patrons. She saw a woman cover her mouth with a napkin, her eyes wide with pity. She saw a man shake his head disapprovingly before turning back to his steak. No one spoke up. No one met her gaze. In a room full of the most powerful people in the city, she was utterly alone. In the sterile confines of the staff bathroom, she locked the door and stared at her reflection. A stranger stared back. Her hair was a matted, sticky mess. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks. Her blouse was ruined, a pathetic, transparent rag. But she didn't cry. Crying was a luxury, an admission of defeat. Instead, a cold, clear anger began to solidify in her gut. Her phone buzzed in her locker. It was a text from Julian. "How's the real world tonight, C? Don't let the barbarians get you down." It was their running joke. She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keypad. She could tell him. She could type out the entire sordid story. And then what? Julian would descend with the force of a hurricane. He would want to destroy them, to ruin Sterling Prescott's life. But that was his world, the world of gods throwing thunderbolts. This was hers. She had to handle it. Telling him felt like surrendering the last shred of her hard-won independence. She took a deep, shaky breath, changed into her spare uniform, and tied her damp hair back into a tight, severe bun. She typed her reply. Same old, same old. Just another Tuesday. Talk tomorrow. She didn't know that a young busboy named Leo, a student who Clara often helped with his coursework, had been clearing a nearby table. She didn't know that he had filmed the entire incident on his phone, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. And she didn't know that Leo, feeling helpless and wanting to do something, had just uploaded the 37-second clip to a viral video site with the simple title, Rich Jerk at Luciel Humiliates Waitress. He had no idea who the waitress was. He just knew what he saw was wrong. He had just lit a fuse, and the fire was already racing toward Julian Croft's hyper-secure, data-driven world. Julian Croft didn't consume media. He inhaled data. His penthouse, which occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek, anonymous skyscraper he owned in Soho, was less a home and more a command center. The walls were a mosaic of screens displaying stock tickers, geopolitical heat maps, and streams of raw data from his company, Kronos Analytics. His primary tool was an AI he'd built himself, named Cassandra. Cassandra's purpose was to identify patterns, to find the signal in the noise of global information. At 11:27 p.m., a new alert pinged on his central monitor. It wasn't a market fluctuation or a security threat. It was flagged under personal proximity anomaly. Cassandra had identified a viral video, rapidly gaining traction, that contained a facial recognition match for Clara Croft with a 98% confidence score. He clicked the link. The video was grainy, shot from a low angle. He saw the opulent dining room, the table of jeering men. He saw Sterling Prescott III, a man he knew by reputation, a feckless heir to a crumbling real estate empire, propped up by risky debt. And then he saw Clara. He watched, his face impassive, as the champagne cascaded over his sister's head. He saw her stand there, frozen. He saw the laughter. He saw the maitre d' blame her. He watched the clip a second time, and a third. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of servers. A cold, precise rage, unlike anything he had felt in years, began to crystallize within him. It was not the hot, messy anger of a brawl. It was the chilling, focused fury of a master strategist seeing an unacceptable variable introduced onto his board. His first instinct was to call her. He dialed her number. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. She was screening his calls, which meant she knew he'd likely seen it and didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want him to interfere. His jaw tightened. Her stubborn independence, a trait he usually admired, was now an infuriating obstacle. He swiveled in his chair and spoke to the empty room. Cassandra, I want everything on Sterling Prescott III and Prescott Consolidated. Financials, debt structure, pending deals, personal vices, every settled lawsuit, every non-disclosure agreement. I want a complete structural analysis. Find the load-bearing walls. Acknowledge, Julian. A calm, synthesized female voice replied from hidden speakers. Initiating deep dive protocol. His second call was to Evelyn Reed, his general counsel, a woman in her late 50s with a mind like a steel trap and no discernible conscience when it came to executing his directives. Evelyn, he said, his voice flat, we have a new project. Codename, Astoria. There was a pause. Is this a hostile takeover? Of a sort, Julian said, his eyes still fixed on the frozen image of his sister's humiliated face on the screen. It's more of a controlled demolition. For the next 2 hours, Julian and Evelyn worked, their communication a rapid-fire exchange of data and strategy. Cassandra fed them information in real time. Prescott Consolidated was a dinosaur. They were over-leveraged, exposed on 3 major commercial real estate developments that were behind schedule and over budget. Their biggest project, a luxury waterfront development in Red Hook, was entirely dependent on a zoning variance from the city that was expected to be a rubber stamp approval in the next week. Their primary lender for the Red Hook project is First National Mercantile, Evelyn reported, her voice crisp over the encrypted line. They're vulnerable. The loan covenants have strict progress clauses. Any significant delay could trigger a review. Who sits on the city's zoning board? Julian asked. A list of names appeared on his screen. Cassandra had already cross-referenced them with Julian's network of contacts and indirect influence. Two of them owed favors to a shell corporation Julian controlled. The Prescotts are old money, Julian, Evelyn cautioned. They have deep roots in this city. This isn't like taking down a bloated tech startup. Old roots can be severed, Julian replied. Their arrogance is their primary vulnerability. They believe their name makes them invincible. We're going to show them that in the modern world, data is more powerful than a legacy. Just before 2 a.m., Clara finally called him back. Her voice was small, weary. I saw it, Clara, he said, cutting through any pretense. Julian, please, don't do anything. It was horrible, but it's over. I quit my job. I just want to forget it. He poured champagne on you like you were nothing. His friends filmed it for sport. And you want me to do nothing? A hint of incredulity crept into his voice, a rare crack in his controlled facade. What are you going to do? Send lawyers? Ruin his life? That just proves his point, that people like us are different, that we operate by a different set of rules. I don't want that. I just want him to understand that what he did was wrong. Julian was silent for a moment, processing her words. She was thinking about morality. He was thinking about mechanics. Her idealism, so alien to his own pragmatic worldview, was both frustrating and oddly admirable. You're right, he said finally, and he could feel her relief through the phone. A lawsuit is too messy. A public fight is beneath us. Thank you, she whispered. Get some rest, Clara. We'll talk in the morning. He hung up. Evelyn's voice came back on the line. Are we standing down? No, Julian said, his gaze turning back to the screens, which now displayed a complex web of the Prescott family's financial and political connections. We are not standing down. We are becoming invisible. He had promised Clara he wouldn't ruin Sterling Prescott's life with a public attack. He would simply create the conditions for Sterling Prescott to ruin it himself. The demolition would not be announced with an explosion. It would begin with a quiet, imperceptible tremor deep in the foundation. The first tremor hit Sterling Prescott III at 9:15 a.m. the next morning. He was in his office, nursing a hangover with a black coffee and scrolling through the comments on the viral video. Most were condemning him, but a vocal minority were defending him, celebrating his audacity. He smirked. All publicity was good publicity. Then his father, Sterling Prescott Jr., a formidable man with a mane of silver hair and a permanent scowl, stormed into his office without knocking. He threw a tablet down on the mahogany desk. What in the hell is this? He roared. On the screen was an article from a niche but influential urban planning blog. The headline read, Leaked report suggests potential soil contamination at Prescott's Red Hook site. The article detailed an anonymous report, allegedly from a disgruntled former contractor, suggesting the land for their flagship development had been insufficiently tested for industrial toxins from its previous life as a shipyard. It's garbage. A hit piece, Sterling III said dismissively, waving a hand. Some blogger trying to get clicks off my name. The city's Department of Environmental Protection doesn't think it's garbage, his father shot back. They called 10 minutes ago. They're putting a temporary hold on our zoning variance pending an expedited but thorough review. That could take weeks, months. Sterling's bravado faltered. The Red Hook project was their Hail Mary, the deal that was supposed to stabilize the company's finances for the next decade. We'll get our lawyers on it. We'll sue the blog for libel. While our lawyers are filing papers, our lenders are getting nervous. His father paced the room like a caged lion. First National Mercantile needs that variance to release the next round of funding. Without it, the entire project stalls. As if on cue, Sterling's private line rang. It was Brad, his broker. Sterling, what's going on? Prescott Consolidated stock just dropped 6% in the first hour of trading. It's a reaction to this fake news about Red Hook, Sterling said, trying to sound bored. It's more than that. There's a massive short sell order against you. Someone is betting big that your stock is about to crater. The volume is huge. I've never seen anything like it placed this quietly. It's like a ghost is attacking your company. Sterling felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was too coordinated. The blog post, the city's reaction, the short sell. It felt strategic. His mind immediately went to the waitress, Clara. Could this be connected? Impossible. She was a nobody, a service worker. What could she possibly do? Meanwhile, Clara was in her small but sunny apartment in Brooklyn, trying to force herself to study. But the words on the screen blurred. The humiliation of the night before kept replaying in her mind, a corrosive loop of memory. She felt powerless, a feeling she despised. Julian had promised he'd do nothing, and while she was relieved, a small, dark part of her had hoped for some form of cosmic justice. A knock on her door startled her. It was Leo, the busboy from the restaurant, looking nervous and holding a small envelope. "Miss Croft," he said, his eyes downcast, I wanted to give you this. It's my tips from last night. I saw what happened and it was wrong. And I'm the one who posted the video. I'm sorry if it caused you more trouble. I just thought people should see." Clara looked at the young man, his earnest face filled with a righteous anger on her behalf. "You don't have to apologize, Leo. And please, keep your tips." He shook his head, pushing the envelope into her hand. "No, please. Also, I heard them talking before it happened. The main guy, Sterling, he was bragging to his friends about something." Clara's focus sharpened. "What was he bragging about?" "Something about the Red Hook steal," Leo said, scrunching his face in concentration. "He said his family was getting a piece of waterfront land for a song because the city councilman, a guy named Rodriguez, was in their pocket. He said the zoning change was a done deal." A councilman named Rodriguez. In their pocket. The detail was small, a piece of drunken bravado, but it was specific. It was a pressure point. For the first time since the incident, Clara felt a spark of something other than shame. It felt like agency. She thanked Leo profusely and closed the door. She stared at her phone, her brother's name glowing on the screen. She had told him not to get involved. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. She pressed the call button. "Julian," she said, her voice steady, "I have something you need to hear." The second tremor was far more severe. Armed with the name Rodriguez, Cassandra and Evelyn Reed went to work. Within an hour, they had unearthed a network of shell companies and indirect payments linking Councilman Rodriguez to Prescott Consolidated. It was carefully disguised, but the digital trail was undeniable. Julian didn't leak the information to the press. That would be too crude. Instead, he had an intermediary, a respected ethics watchdog he funded through a philanthropic foundation, send a private, detailed report to the district attorney's office and the mayor. The report didn't mention the Prescotts by name. It simply highlighted a pattern of suspicious financial activity surrounding the councilman, specifically related to the Red Hook zoning vote. The political fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Prescotts. The mayor, spooked by a potential corruption scandal, publicly announced that the Red Hook zoning vote would be indefinitely postponed, pending a full ethics investigation into the entire process. Councilman Rodriguez, panicking, issued a statement recusing himself from all matters related to Prescott Consolidated. The news hit the markets like a bombshell. First National Mercantile officially froze the Prescotts' line of credit for the Red Hook project, citing the material uncertainty of the situation. Prescott Consolidated stock went into freefall, plummeting another 30%. In the Prescott boardroom, the atmosphere was funereal. "Our flagship project is dead in the water," Sterling Jr. said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Our stock is worthless. Our lenders are calling in our other loans. We're facing a complete liquidity crisis." Sterling III sat in stunned silence. His world, which had been so solid and unassailable 48 hours ago, was dissolving into smoke. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was a terrified boy watching his father's kingdom burn. "This isn't random," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "This is her. The waitress. It has to be." "Don't be an idiot," his father snapped. "A waitress didn't orchestrate a multi-front corporate assault. This is a professional, a competitor we've angered, someone with immense resources." "But it all started after that night," Sterling insisted, his desperation mounting. "She must know someone. Her boyfriend, her family." "Find out," his father commanded, his eyes boring into his son. "Find out everything there is to know about this Clara. I want to know where she eats, where she sleeps, who she talks to. If there is a connection, you find it, and then you fix it." For Sterling, fixing it meant one thing: confrontation. He was a man who believed any problem could be solved with a sufficient application of force or money. He would find this waitress, and he would make her call off her dogs one way or another. He was backed into a corner, and like any cornered animal, he was becoming dangerously unpredictable. He had no idea he was walking willingly into the final, most crucial phase of Julian Croft's plan. Clara had agreed to meet Julian for lunch, a rare occurrence. He'd chosen a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in the West Village, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and no celebrity clientele. It was neutral ground. "Their stock has lost nearly half its value," Julian said, calmly sipping water. "Their Red Hook project is buried in a corruption probe. Their lenders are abandoning them. By my projections, they have less than a week before they'll have to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy." Clara pushed a piece of pasta around her plate. There was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet gravity. "Is it over?" "It is a mathematical certainty," he confirmed, "unless they can secure a massive infusion of capital from a new source, and no sane investor would touch them right now." He paused, his analytical gaze meeting hers. "Except one. You? A holding company I control has been quietly buying up their corporate debt from the panicking lenders at a steep discount," Julian explained. "By the end of the week, I will be their single largest creditor. I will, for all intents and purposes, own them." Clara fell silent. She had wanted accountability. What Julian had delivered was annihilation. "What will you do?" "I will force a restructuring. Sterling Jr. will be retired. Sterling III will be permanently removed from any position of authority. I will install, the new board would be installed. The company would be stabilized, its employees and smaller investors protected. His position would then be sold. The Prescott dynasty would be a historical footnote." Julian's words hung in the air of the small Italian restaurant, each one a perfectly polished, unassailable fact. It was, he'd said, a clean, efficient resolution. Clinical, like a surgeon describing the removal of a tumor. Before Clara could form a reply, could find a way to articulate the strange, hollow ache that accompanied this news of absolute victory, her phone vibrated against the checkered tablecloth. A text message. Leo, the busboy. Her blood ran cold as she read his frantic words. "Miss Croft, be careful. That guy, Sterling, he came back to Le Ciel. He was asking the staff for your address. Mr. Davies gave it to him. I'm so sorry." The room, with its comforting smells of garlic and basil, suddenly felt thin, the air brittle. She looked up at her brother, her face a pale mask of what it had been a moment before. Julian, a master of observing micro-expressions, saw the shift instantly. The strategist vanished, replaced by the older brother. "What is it?" She slid the phone across the table. He read the message, and for the first time in a decade, Clara saw the ghost lose its composure. The icy control that was Julian's armor did not just crack, it shattered. A flicker of something primal and terrifying flashed in his gray eyes. The pure, undiluted rage of a predator whose territory had been breached, whose kin had been threatened. "He's coming for you," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that seemed to absorb the light from the room. "Julian, he's just desperate," she began, her own voice betraying a tremor she hated. "He's flailing. He thinks I'm the one behind this. He is an arrogant, violent man whose world has just been immolated," Julian countered, the words precise and sharp as shards of glass. He was already on his feet, his phone in hand, fingers flying across the screen. "My security team will be at your apartment in 10 minutes. They'll escort you to the penthouse. You will go there directly, and you will not open the door for anyone but them. No. The word was out before she had even consciously formed it. It was quiet, but it had the density of granite. The frightened, humiliated woman who had stood shivering under a cascade of champagne was gone, washed away not by time, but by the fire of the last 48 hours. In her place stood someone else, someone who had been given a terrifying glimpse behind the curtain, who had seen the levers and gears that move the world, and was no longer intimidated by the shadows they cast. "No, Julian," she repeated, standing to meet his gaze. "I'm not going to hide in your fortress. This started with me, and it will end with me." He sees me as a powerless victim, a proxy for some powerful man he can't find. Hiding proves him right. I am going to show him, once and for all, how wrong he is. Clara, this is not a theoretical exercise. He is unstable, unpredictable. Julian's voice was taut with a protective fury she hadn't heard since they were children, and he'd faced down a schoolyard bully for her. "And I have spent the last 4 years studying the mechanics of the human mind," she shot back, her own resolve hardening into steel. "I know his pathology, narcissistic personality with compensatory, grandiose features, prone to rage when his perceived superiority is fundamentally challenged. Running away, letting you handle this, will only confirm his belief that I am a pawn, an object. He needs to see that the person he dismissed, the person he saw as nothing, was the agent of his own undoing. I'm going to face him, on my own terms." She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "You have to trust me." Julian stared at her for a long, silent moment. She could see the war behind his eyes, the logician processing probabilities, the brother battling a visceral need to protect. His entire life was built on controlling variables, on mitigating risk. She was asking him to embrace the most volatile variable of all, a direct confrontation between his sister and the man who had degraded her. But he also saw something new in her expression. It wasn't defiance. It was a deep, settled strength, an ownership of her own power that he had never witnessed before. She was not asking for his permission. She was informing him of a fact. He gave a slow, reluctant nod, the tension in his shoulders easing by a fraction. "Not alone, and not at your home. The environment must be controlled." He paused, a new, chillingly precise strategy already forming in his mind. "We do this my way, and we do it tonight." The stage was not an apartment, but a mausoleum. Le Ciel, the Grand Astoria's cathedral of wealth, was shuttered for the evening, closed for a private event that consisted of a single table set for 2 in the cavernous, empty dining room. The silence was profound, a living entity that pressed in from all sides. Every surface, from the polished marble floors to the crystal chandeliers, seemed to hold the ghost of the other night. The jeering laughter, the collective gasp, the cold, sticky shame. Julian's directive had been simple and absolute. The restaurant owner had been made an offer he could not refuse. Mr. Davies, the sneering maître d', had been unceremoniously dismissed hours earlier. A skeleton crew, loyal only to the Astoria's owner, was instructed to direct Sterling Prescott III to the main dining room upon his arrival and then disappear. Clara sat at the table, the same one where Sterling and his friends had celebrated their hollow victory. She wore a simple charcoal gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair down, falling over her shoulders. She was not in uniform. She was not a servant. She was simply herself. In an adjacent private room, connected by a discreet open microphone, Julian watched a single security feed, his face an unreadable mask of stone. His 2-man security team stood by, shadows in tailored suits, ready to move on his command. Clara focused on her breathing, a steady rhythm in, out. Her hands, resting in her lap beneath the table, were clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every lesson from her psychology textbook swirled in her mind. Establish a baseline. Do not mirror his aggression. Control the frame. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a practical exam, and the stakes were terrifyingly real. The grand doors at the far end of the room swung open with a soft sigh, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Sterling strode in, his movements jerky and agitated. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His impeccably tailored suit was rumpled, his tie was loose, and his eyes, those cold winter sky eyes, were bloodshot and wild with a desperate fury. He scanned the empty room, a predator searching for his prey, and then his gaze locked onto Clara. A sneer, ugly and raw, twisted his lips. "There you are," he spat, the words echoing in the vast space. "The $1,000 waitress." He crossed the floor, his expensive leather shoes clacking an angry rhythm on the marble. He didn't sit, but instead planted his hands on the opposite side of the table, leaning over her, invading her space. The air was thick with the scent of stale whiskey and pure, unadulterated rage. "I don't know who you are," he began, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "I don't know if it's your boyfriend, your father, some rich pervert you're sleeping with, but I know it's you. You've had your fun. You've made your point. It's over. You are going to call off your attack dogs. Right now." Clara looked up at him, her gaze calm and steady, a placid lake meeting a hurricane. She did not flinch. She did not lean away. She held her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sterling." Using his first name was a calculated choice. It stripped away the formal barrier of Mr. Prescott, the title he used as a shield and a weapon. It placed them for the first time on an equal footing. His eyes widened in fury. "Don't play dumb with me!" He slammed his open palm flat on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. The water glasses jumped, and a tremor ran through the silverware. "My family's company, 100 years of work, of building, is being systematically disemboweled. My father is a ghost in his own office. Our lives are being destroyed, and the timeline, the fucking timeline, begins the second after you ran out of here, crying to whoever it is that pulls your strings." He straightened up, breathing heavily, and reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out not a wallet, but a personal checkbook and a gold pen. He scribbled furiously, his hands shaking, tore the check out with a vicious rip, and threw it onto the table between them. It slid to a stop beside her water glass. "There," he said, his chest heaving. $1 million. Is that enough for you? Is that the price to make this all go away? Take the money, run back to your puppet master, and tell him the game is over." Clara's eyes drifted down to the check. The number was written in angry, jagged strokes. $1,000. She looked at the signature. Sterling Prescott III. Then she looked back up at him, her expression not of anger or triumph, but of something he couldn't comprehend. It looked almost like pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice quiet but clear, each word landing with immense weight. "This was never about money." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I have access to more money than you could ever imagine." Sterling let out a harsh, grating laugh. "Right, I'm sure your tips are fantastic. Saving up for a used car, are you?" "No," Clara said, leaning forward slightly, claiming the space he had tried to dominate. "Here is what you don't understand. You think the world is divided into two types of people, the powerful like you and the powerless like me. The people who matter and the people who serve them. But that's not the world we live in anymore. You think you humiliated a poor, anonymous waitress? You think you're a titan and I am an insect beneath your shoe. But the truth is, you're the one who is anonymous, Sterling. You're just a name you inherited, a legacy you've squandered. You don't build anything. You don't create anything. You just exist inside the buildings your grandfather built, consuming the wealth your father manages, mistaking privilege for personal greatness." His face, already pale, turned ashen. The sneer faltered, replaced by a dark confusion. "You have no idea who I am." "Oh, I think I do," she countered, her voice gaining a clinical precision, the psychologist in her dissecting him, piece by piece, right before his eyes. "You're a textbook case. You require constant external validation because you have no internal sense of self-worth. You surround yourself with sycophants who laugh at your cruel jokes, not because they're funny, but because they're afraid of you, and you mistake their fear for respect. And when you feel threatened or slighted, or worst of all, ignored, you lash out with disproportionate cruelty. Because deep down, In the quiet places you don't let anyone see, you're terrified that you're right, that without the Prescott name, you are absolutely nothing. He was on his feet now, stumbling back, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter. His bravado had completely evaporated, leaving behind only raw, exposed panic. You shut your mouth! You shut your goddamn mouth! That night, Clara continued, her voice rising now with a controlled, righteous power that filled the empty hall. You weren't just drunk. You were performing. You needed an audience to watch you assert your dominance over someone you perceived as weak. You needed to prove to your friends and to yourself that you were the king, that you could degrade another human being with impunity and face no consequences. But you made a mistake, a critical error in judgment. She finally allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. You chose me, and then you got sloppy. You were bragging, weren't you? About the Red Hook deal, about owning a city councilman named Rodriguez. It's funny the things you can overhear when people think you're just part of the furniture. The blood drained from his face. The final, terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The realization dawned in his eyes not like a sunrise, but like the flash of an explosion, incinerating everything he thought he knew. It wasn't some hidden enemy. It wasn't a corporate rival. It wasn't a powerful man behind the curtain. It was her. Not because she had a protector, but because she had been listening. She had been the source, the spark that lit the fire. You, he whispered, his voice a strangled rasp, the word dissolving into disbelief. Me, she said simply. As if her word were a cue, the doors to the adjacent room swung open. Julian Croft stepped through, followed by his two security men. He wasn't physically imposing, but his presence was a gravitational force, bending the atmosphere of the room around him. He moved with an unnerving silence, his gaze falling on Sterling, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far more devastating. The cool, clinical disinterest of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Prescott, Julian said, his voice calm and even, devoid of any emotion. My name is Julian Croft. Clara is my sister. Sterling stared, his mind already reeling, struggling to process this new impossible data point. Julian Croft, the ghost, the phantom of Wall Street, the reclusive tech magnate whose name was whispered in awe and fear, a man rumored to deconstruct corporate empires with a few lines of code. Your company, Prescott Consolidated, is insolvent, Julian continued as if discussing the weather. As of 90 minutes ago, a holding company I control acquired a controlling interest in your outstanding debt. You and your father will be removed from the board tomorrow morning. You will be offered a generous severance package, contingent on the signing of a permanent and all-encompassing non-disclosure agreement, and you will never, under any circumstances, come near my sister again. He took a step forward. Is that clear? Sterling stood there, utterly broken. The entire edifice of his identity, his pride, his name, his wealth, his power, had been systematically leveled, razed to the very foundations. And the architect of his ruin was the woman he had dismissed as a nobody, the quiet waitress he had doused in vintage champagne for a laugh. He looked from Julian's implacable, emotionless face to Clara's steady, intelligent gaze. And for the first time in his gilded, meaningless life, Sterling Prescott III understood the true, crushing weight of the word consequence. He didn't speak. He just gave a single spastic nod, a puppet whose strings had been cut, before turning and stumbling out of the room, a ghost leaving his own tomb. The heavy doors sighed shut behind him, and the silence that rushed back in was different. It was clean. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 2 days. The adrenaline drained out of her in a sudden, dizzying rush, leaving her feeling hollowed out and trembling. Julian was at her side in an instant, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Are you all right? He asked, his voice softening. The ghost receding to reveal the brother once more. She nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was true. She looked at the $1 million check still lying on the table, a pathetic monument to a man's profound misunderstanding of the world. I need to go home, she whispered. The aftermath was not an ending, but a slow, quiet dissolution. Sterling Prescott III did not rage or plot revenge. He simply vanished. 6 months later, Clara saw him. It was a rainy Tuesday, and she was in a generic midtown coffee shop waiting for a meeting. He was at the counter, fumbling with a credit card that was declined. He was thinner, his expensive suit replaced by an ill-fitting blazer. He looked ordinary, anonymous. When he turned, his gaze swept past her without a flicker of recognition. He had become what he'd always feared he was. Nothing. The ultimate erasure was not financial, but existential. Clara never cashed the check. It remained in a simple wooden box on her desk, alongside her university diploma. It was not a trophy. It was a memento mori, a reminder of the destructive power of arrogance, but also a reminder of her own capacity for a cold, precise fury she hadn't known she possessed. There were nights she woke up, the memory of Sterling's broken face in the empty restaurant haunting her, and she wondered about the fine line between justice and destruction. She finished her degree with honors, and with Julian's quiet guidance, established the foundation. It wasn't a grand, gleaming edifice. It was a modest second-floor walk-up office in Brooklyn, staffed by 3 passionate paralegals, a rotating group of law school interns, and Leo the busboy, who worked there part-time while finishing his degree. They didn't fight titans of industry. They fought for back pay for kitchen staff, filed harassment claims for hotel maids, and set up workshops to teach service workers their rights. It was slow, grinding, unglamorous work. It was the most fulfilling thing she had ever done. One evening, a year after that night at Le Ciel, Julian came to visit her at the office. He navigated the cluttered space, so different from his own minimalist world of glass and data, and stood before a corkboard covered with thank you notes and photos of the people they had helped. "I was wrong," he said, his back to her, as he studied a picture of a smiling waitress who had won a settlement against a hotel chain. "When I saw that video, my every instinct was to build a fortress around you, to shield you from the ugliness of the world." Clara came to stand beside him. "And instead, you gave me a weapon." He turned to face her, a rare, thoughtful smile on his lips. "No, the weapon was always yours. I just provided the ammunition." He looked around the small, humble office, at the tangible proof of her work. "I move markets. I restructure debt. It's all abstract, zeros and ones. I can tear things down with surgical precision. But this," he gestured to the board, "this is different. You're building something. It's a different kind of power. It's slower, more difficult, but I suspect it's more real." He looked at his sister, and for the first time, he saw her not as the little girl he needed to protect, but as an equal. A woman who had faced public degradation and private fear, and had transmuted it not into wealth or vengeance, but into a quiet, relentless engine for justice. She had taken her invisibility, the very quality that had made her a target, and turned it into a lens through which she could see the people that the world, in men like Sterling Prescott, refused to. The world was still full of casual cruelty, of unchecked privilege. But now, in this small corner of the city, something new was taking root. It was not a dynasty built on a name, but a sanctuary built on the radical idea that every person, no matter their station, deserved to be seen. It was a legacy far more enduring than any she could have inherited. It was one she was building herself, one quiet victory at a time.